In this CIE A Level Economics video, we'll be going through utility, specifically 7.1.3, the Equi-Marginal principle, 7.1.4, the derivation of an individual demand curve, and 7.1.5, the limitations of marginal utility theory and its assumptions of rational behavior. To get us started, what is the Equi-Marginal principle? It describes how rational individuals or firms allocate resources efficiently to maximize satisfaction or profit. It states that resources should be allocated between goods such that marginal utility per unit of resource is equal. This ensures that total satisfaction is maximized. Let's look at this in terms of the consumer. Rationally, consumers aim to maximize their total utility by allocating income across a range of goods. As you can see in this formula below, the Equi-Marginal principle shows that a consumer distributes their spending or income in a way that utility derived per dollar is equal amongst all goods. As you can see, the marginal utility for the first good divided by the price of the first good is equal to the marginal utility of the second good divided by the price of the second good. Let's look at the Equi-Marginal utility through this example below. This table shows Jason's marginal utility for coffee and tea. As you can see, when consuming 3 coffees, the marginal utility from coffee divided by price is 6. And when consuming 3 teas, the marginal utility from tea divided by price is also 6. So rationally, Jason would buy 3 coffees and 3 teas to maximize his utility. Now let's focus on the derivation of an individual demand curve. When consumption of a good increases, the satisfaction from each additional unit decreases, and this is because of the law of diminishing marginal utility. This affects a person's willingness to pay. This is because when your satisfaction decreases, you'd be less willing to pay for the good. Now, the equilibrium point is where marginal utility is equal to price. This is where a consumer maximizes their total utility given their budget or income. The curve is downward sloping due to the law of diminishing marginal utility. Now, there are several limitations of the Equi-Marginal principle or theory, one of which is that utility can't be measured. There is no objective way of providing a value to utility because it varies across people due to different preferences. It's also difficult to use when extended to multiple goods and services. Therefore, the many interactions between demand for each good needs to be taken into account. It also relies on the assumption that consumers act rationally in terms of spending and consumption. However, that is not always the case. This might be due to information failure, cognitive biases, or emotional influences and social factors, which cause consumers to spend irrationally. Now let's look at this past paper question. What is a correct statement of the Equi-Marginal utility rule? Is it A, the marginal utility of X must equal the marginal utility of Y? B, the marginal utility of X divided by the price of X must equal the marginal utility of Y divided by the price of Y? C, the marginal utility of X divided by the price of Y must equal the marginal utility of Y divided by the price of Y? Or D, the price of X must equal to the price of Y? I'm going to give you guys 1 minute to answer this question. Okay, time is up. The correct answer is B. The marginal utility of X divided by the price of X must equal the marginal utility of Y divided by the price of Y. And we can see that through this previous formula we spoke about before. Over here we have a past paper question which is essay-based. It's asking to explain how a consumer should allocate expenditure in order to achieve maximum satisfaction and analyze how a rise in income might affect that allocation. It does include the topic of indifference curves, which we'll explain in later videos. However, feel free to pause and attempt to answer and look at the mark scheme I put below. Let's go through another past paper question, which is also essay-based. It's asking us to explain how a consumer allocates expenditure according to the principle of equi-marginal utility, and to analyze how a change in income might affect that allocation. I'd like us to go through this together. So the things we need to include is the explanation of marginal utility, which is the additional satisfaction or benefit derived from consuming one or more additional units of a good or service, the law of diminishing marginal utility, which is as consumption of a good increases, the marginal utility derived from each additional unit decreases, the equi-marginal principle and its formula, which states that as a consumer maximizes their total utility, when marginal utility per dollar spent is equal across all goods. If this condition isn't met, consumers can reallocate expenditure between goods that provide a lower marginal utility to the goods that provide a higher marginal utility to increase their total utility and satisfaction. Now let's talk about what happens when income increases. When income rises, the demand curve will typically shift to the right for normal goods, which are goods for which demand increases when income increases. There'll be a change in quantity consumed, so the consumer can now afford to increase their expenditure and may purchase higher quantities of a good that provides a higher utility. If the price of the goods remains constant, the equilibrium, which is the marginal utility divided by price, will adjust as the consumer reallocates the additional income across all goods. Now, when income decreases, the demand curve will typically shift to the left, specifically for normal goods, whereas the demand for inferior goods, which is goods for which demand increases as income decreases, would cause the demand curve to shift to the right. In terms of consumption, consumers would reduce their expenditure on luxury goods and reallocate their income towards necessities. For the equilibrium, the consumer would aim to restore the equilibrium by focusing on the goods which provide the highest marginal utility for its price due to their reduction in income. Now, the price changes and movements along the supply curve. When price increases in one good, it would cause a marginal utility divided by price ratio for that good to decrease, which would encourage the consumer to decrease their consumption of that good and find substitutes that have a better marginal utility per price ratio. When price decreases in one good, it would cause a marginal utility divided by price ratio for that good to increase, encouraging higher consumption for that good. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck on your exams, and don't forget to subscribe and look at our other social media platforms.